Hey, Pastor, doesn't science disprove the Bible?
Isn't Genesis just a fairy tale?
Is God for real? Did he really create everything in 6 literal days?
Didn't God just use the Big Bang?
Why is there death and suffering? Really believe the Bible?
Didn't man evolve from apes?
For answers to these questions and more, stand by for Believing the Bible.
Welcome to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Dr. Ken Harris, Dr. Carl Williams, Terry Reed, and our producer, Jeremiah Rosenthal, all with the members of the San Antonio Bible-Based Science Association. We are here to reassure you you can believe the Bible from the very first verse. Today we have a special guest in Angels-Stepanik who was taught evolution in both school and church. I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. He had his eyes opened with a Discover Creation seminar with AOI, has done extensive personal research, and joined AOI full-time in 1997. He's taught both in the U.S. and international extensively and has done extensive research in Genesis and its relevance to the rest of the Bible. Richard, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Scott. Hey, thank you for having me come in with this interview. I really appreciate it. Some of the things that I'm going to be teaching here that are talking about this morning really changed my life. And probably give a little more background before we get into the creation of angels. And basically, I was taught evolution in high school and college, and in the church I used to attend also taught evolution to be true. And in this church, I taught, you might say, theistic evolution to my students in this church because I was a teacher there. I then became a creationist through studying science, not so much of studying the Bible. It was really studying science and going to an Alpha Omega Institute seminar. That changed my whole worldview and knowing that evolution is not true. There's absolutely, in my research, there's no evidence, scientific observational evidence that evolution is true. And we're going to be talking about that here in this other episode, The Origin of the Religion of Evolution. But what I want to get into first here is the creation of angels. I am totally convinced in my research that understanding the creation of angels are directly connected to the origin of the religion of evolution. Those two are connected. So, and I'll get into that. And I can't take full credit of all this research. I got started by reading a book by Henry Morris, Dr. Henry Morris, A Long War Against God. Highly recommend that book. And that kind of opened my eyes to both of these topics. And I just added to what Henry Morris was taught. So we're going to go into the creation of angels. And the question is, when were angels created? I was always taught that angels were created for Genesis 1:1, but in my research, nowhere in Scripture do I find that. But I can limit it down to about 12 hours when God created angels. And we're going to look at a few verses. One of the verses we're going to take a look at is Exodus 20:11. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. So as we take a look at this, angels are called the host of heaven, which means you cannot have any angels until God creates heaven. You can't have any host of heaven until heavens are created. And so we do know, according to Scripture, that God created heaven on day 1 and then created the heavens, or made the heavens, extra heaven, on day 2. And we'll talk a little bit about that. There's another verse I like to go to of verses. It's in Ezekiel chapter 28. It's 13, 14, and 15. It talks about a cherub, an anointed cherub. And we do know, according to Scripture, cherubs are spirit beings. They're in angels. And as I look at this context here, I believe it's Lucifer. It doesn't say Lucifer, but I'm assuming it's Lucifer. And it says twice, both in verse 13 and 15, that this angel was created on a day. There were no days before Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth is the beginning of the very first day. So we do know, according to Scripture, that the angels were created on one of the 6 days of creation. Now the question comes, what day? Well, going to Psalm 104, verse 2, and you have to be careful with Psalms, because Psalms are basically written in Hebrew poetry. You've got to be careful not to take everything literally. But we're going to compare Psalm 104 to Genesis chapter 1. Now, Genesis chapter 1 is in narrative prose, which you read Genesis not as a book of poetry. It's not written in poetry. It is a historical book. It is true history. This is how it happened. And we go to verse 2. Who covers thyself with light, as with a garment, we're talking about God, who stretches out the heavens, this is heavens plural, that S is very important, like a curtain. Then in verse 3, he says, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters. So as we look at this, we have light, we have heavens plural, which is, in my viewpoint, is extremely important to understand, and we have waters. Well, going back to Genesis 1 through 3, we see in the beginning God created the heaven. I believe that heaven, according to my research, is singular. It's not plural. It's just one heaven at this time because of the context. And the earth. And we go to verse 2, talks about the earth was without form. So this earth in verse 1 is not the earth we live on today. It is very clear this earth is without form. So the next question is, what is this earth? As we read, and void and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Verse 3, we have God said, let there be light, and there was light. So as we look at this, we have heaven singular, we have earth, and that earth, according to my research, is water. It's not the earth we live on today. As we read Scripture, as we look at the context of Genesis chapter 1, God mentions water 8 times before he gets to earth again. So if that earth is not water, I have no idea what that earth is, because God's going to make everything directly and indirectly out of water, which I view as very important. And Peter also emphasizes on that this earth is water in the beginning. In 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 5, states that God created and made everything in the heavens, and the earth was formed out of water. Very important to understand in my viewpoint, especially in astronomy. So we have that earth as being water. So we got water, we got heaven as singular, and we have light.
Richard, we're going to let you continue with that thought in just a moment. You are listening to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Terry Reed, Dr. Ken Harris, Dr. Carl Williams, and Jeremiah Rosenthal. If you would like to learn more, go to sabsa.org. That is sabbsa.org. Today, we're with Richard Stepanik with the Alpha Omega Institute, and he's talking about when were the angels created. Richard, please continue.
Okay, so what we have on day 1 is we have time. The beginning is a reference to time, so God created time in verse 1. And we have heaven as singular. We have earth as waters at this time. It will change as God goes through his creation week. And then we have light. So, I've got pictures and demonstrations of all this in my program, but we'll continue on day 2. Then on day 2, God makes the firmament, and God divided the waters from the waters. We have, at this time, we have in verse 6, we have waters twice, 3 times actually, and then in verse 7, he's talking about waters twice. So he's dividing, he's mentioned right now, basically 7 times he's working with water, and the deep is a reference to water. So he makes the firmament. He divides the water from the waters, and he calls that firmament heaven. Now on day 2, we have more than one heaven. Actually, in my viewpoint, we have 3: atmosphere, outer space, and then the space above the water, where is God's throne. So on day 2, he separates the waters from the waters and makes the firmament, which is outer space. He's going to put the sun, moon, and stars in the firmament, so it's not atmosphere. It's not good to put the sun, moon, and stars in our atmosphere. So on day 2, we have basically 3 heavens. As we take a look at that, heaven is my throne, and the earth is his footstool. So the earth is a footstool, and I go into more detail with that in another program. So we go back to Psalm 104, verse 3, who lays the beams of his chambers in the water. So we look at verse 3, though his chambers means upper throne, upper room. His throne in heaven is actually the foundation, or the beams are sitting in water. And so we also take a look at day 2, we have heavens plural. So as we go through back to that of Genesis or Psalm 4, after he makes the heavens, verse 4, who maketh his angels spirits and his ministers a flaming fire. So after he makes heavens on day 2, he makes angels. So the angels are made on the latter part of day 2 or the first part of day 3. And as we take a look then at verse 5, who laid the foundations of the earth. I always was wondering, what day did God made the foundations of the earth? Well, if you're going to build a house, what do you want to build your house on? Water or rock or land? Well, in my viewpoint, you want to build your house on something that's solid. And so the foundations of the earth is the day that God made land. He made land on day number 3. So as we look at this whole time, and we do a little repeat here, Psalm 104, verse 5, whom covers thyself with light as with a garment, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain. Verse 3 says, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the water. So what we have here, we have light, we have heavens plural, and we have water. So on day 1, again, as a repeat, we had time, heaven singular, waters, and light. Day 2, we have the firmament being made. So we have time, heavens plural, waters, and light. So as we look at Psalm 104, verse 2 and 3, that is day 2. Now, we take a look at verse 5, who laid the foundations of the earth. That is, in my viewpoint, clearly day 3, when he makes land. And between day 2 and Before day 3, we have verse 4, which means he makes his angel spirits his ministers of flaming fire. So the angels, in my viewpoint, as I look at Scripture, are made between day 2 and before day 3, in that roughly 12-hour period. So the angels miss day 1 and 2. They don't come about until after God makes the heavens and has water and time is ticking and his kind of glory. That's the light on verse 3 is coming into his created universe.
Richard, we really thank you for your research into this point. You know, there are a lot of people who think, well, the Bible just doesn't say when they're created. And a lot of people believe, as you had thought before this research, that they were probably created a long time before the creation. It's interesting that it's not directly in Genesis 1. But I thank you for this. You touched upon what I think is a very fascinating topic of the waters of Genesis, which is a whole other topic that we can get into another time.
That is.
Folks,
very interesting.
If you want to follow Richard and the whole ministry at Alpha Mega Institute, their website is discovercreation.org.
Believing the Bible now has a new way you can support our ministry and get some great gifts. For a donation of $10 or more, we will email you a copy of Repetition in the Bible by Jack Cassioni, which shows the Bible to be a self-proving document and shows God's protection of His Word over the ages. For a donation of $25 or more, we will also mail you a copy of Scott Lane's book, What If God Wrote the Bible, showing 6 things we should find in the world and in the Bible if God is the author of the Bible. To get these great gifts, send your check or money order to SABSA at 7620 Avery, Live Oak, Texas 78233. That's SABBSA at 7620 Avery Road, Live Oak, Texas 78233. This information for ordering is also on our contact page at sabsa.org. Information for creation events in our area are on our website's calendar page. For more information or to schedule a presentation, go to sabsa.org or call 210-599-7240. When you go to our website, you can click on a link to our newsletter. Our website has a link for contact information on which you can order our newsletter to be emailed to you, or you can call us. Also go to whyshouldyoubelieve.com. That is Terry's website containing articles looking at current day issues from a biblical perspective. SABSA meets the second Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. We are now meeting at Faith Lutheran Church just south of the corner of Jones Maltzberger and Thousand Oaks. There you will find biblical apologetics and creation science teaching found nowhere else in Bexar County, as well as the availability of books and videos on these important subjects. If you missed any part of this show, you can listen to the show anytime by going to the AM 630 KSLR, the Word in South Texas website. Click on KSLR Podcast, scroll down until you find Believing the Bible. Please join us again next Saturday for Believing the Bible. I'm Scott Lane, and for Terry Reed, Dr. Carl Williams, and Ed Salzadell, thanks for listening, and we hope you found today a reason to believe the Bible.